Well, thank you so much, Jeffrey Anderson, for being with me today on the WaveCapital's guest speaker series on relationship building in a team environment. You're my 109th guest. How are you today, Jeffrey?
I'm doing well, Garrett. How are you? And thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yes, it is a pleasure having you on my show. And I was so fortunate to have your wife as a guest as well. Would love to talk to you as well about your book, Living Room Leadership. And you are the COO and co-founder of Renala. And Brittany was telling me all about your book, about the company, how it started, and would love for you to share with my audience and be at home your perspectives and insights. What made you both want to start this company? What inspired you to write the book? And for my audience at home, you are a former Air Force One and Air Force Two pilot, and you served an incredible career in the US military. So please share with me all your perspectives, wisdom, insight, and thank you again for your service after so many years of selfless acts of protecting our country, defending our homeland, and you've held interesting roles carrying former presidents as an Air Force One pilot and former vice presidents as an Air Force Two pilot. So looking forward to having those discussions as well. Jeffrey, when you think of relationship building in a team environment, what does relationship building mean to you? And what has it meant for your professional career?
It's interesting you bring that up because my take on relationship building is kind of similar to what your take is. I'm very connected with that being a core strength of mine. My wife and I do a lot of things within the Strengths Finders as an initial application into the Renala blueprint. And my top core strengths, relationship building is up there as far as the way things seed. I use that a lot within my military career. I am not a big email guy or a send text messages or whatever. But I like going into offices and seeing people, getting to know their story so that I can use that relationship to kind of help for a football term to move the goal, the yard lines further and further down. And I use that a lot in my last job in the Air Force One unit, the Presidential Airlift Group, during my last significant job in the Air Force, which I was the director of operations for the Presidential Airlift Group. And so building that relationship within that unit in order for us to execute our job was instrumental. And I actually enjoyed that part of it.
You were Vice President Biden's pilot when he was serving in the vice presidency, and as well as you flew Vice President Pence, President Trump, and also President Biden when he was president. So, talking about all those experiences, what was it like for you in those various missions, working alongside your staff, your team, and my audience and me are so excited to hear about what you saw that people like me who have never served in government or served in military, these conversations and these windows of time that you could bring back to the present day would be very fascinating.
Absolutely. Serving in those roles is unique, not something I thought I would ever do. But, it worked out in my career. For a timeline purposes, to go to your answer, I got to the 89th Airlift Wing at Andrews Air Force Base, or Joint Base Andrews now, is the hub spoke for DV Airlift within the Air Force branch. It is what I call all the blue and whites are out there. And within there, there's kind of two units. There's the operations group and all the different other groups that are under the 89th. But in particular, the operations group, that's what centers around almost all VIP airlift within the wing from the vice president on down. I got hired in the unit in the fall of 2015 and showed up in like May of 2016. So when I started flying the 757 or Air Force Two, when the customer was the vice president, and at the time that was Vice President Biden, now, former President Biden, it was towards the campaign season of that year. So did a lot of campaign travel with Biden just in the short stint that I was, qualified in the jet in the fall. And then I quickly transitioned to the next administration, which we flew Vice President Pence. And then from there, I was kind of being looked at because in the presidential realm in Air Force One, not only do they fly the 747, but they fly the 757, So they're always looking at people within the 757 community for those to groom to be into the presidential air group. And I was very fortunate to get called into that community. So that was pretty amazing. So I went into Air Force One about the fall of 2018. So I was doing about 2 years of Air Force Two stuff. And then the rest of my career to 2024 was all under Air Force One. As far as in each position in the aircraft, whether it's our flight attendants, our comm system operators, our Ravens, who are our security forces cops on board, and just all the plethora of the different positions, you kind of have a lens into the background of what's going on within the administration based on what's going on in the world. I'll give you an example. So when I was flying Vice President Pence, the tragic events that happened with the shooting in Las Vegas, if you remember that, in like the fall of 2017, I was on the trip that carried Vice President Pence out to Vegas for him to go see firsthand the atrocities of the event and everything and get a full debrief of the scene. Quite often, the vice president would come back on board. This happened with Vice President Biden at the time, too. They would come on board the jet and then come straight to the cockpit and kind of, hey, how's it going for everyone up there? And then he would say hi to all the positions coming forward. And his expression after seeing that scene was, you could just see the look of disbelief and just like horror on his face. And he shared, kind of a candid moment with us. So you get to kind of see those moments of when these leaders that are leading our country are, they have human emotion to these types of situations and events. And one I shared at coffee with you last week with Brittany, I was fortunate enough in the unit to be on the 20-year anniversary of 9/11. So this is during President Biden's administration. We positioned ourselves to New York the night before. And on this day, being the 20-year anniversary, they were going to go to all three sites. And so starting in downtown, lower Manhattan at Ground Zero with the ceremonies they do every year there. And then coming on, we would fly to Western Pennsylvania so he could go down to Shanksville on the way home from that trip back to DC, so President Biden and the rest of the staff can go to the Pentagon that evening. He came up to the cockpit with us and almost flew in the jump seat with us all the way back to Andrews. Almost so that he was in the seat while we were configuring the plane to land, and we had to say, hey, you can go back to your stateroom, sir. But during that moment, there's a lot going on in the world, obviously that day in general too. He was sharing some intimate moments with us up there. And I think it was neat to know that he knew that he could trust us to be in that moment of vulnerability and share things, that were just on his mind and everything else. And I've never described those conversations, even to Brittany, about what that was, other than the fact that it happened, and share that just with the two other pilots that I flew with that day. So you definitely get a behind the scenes of what's going on in the world. I think I also shared with you that we were on our way back from Asia for a summit. And during the event of coming back home, we're crossing into the United States from northern Canada. And the events in the shooting in Uvalde, Texas was happening at that moment. And we're seeing it real time on the news. And we're getting a pulse of what's going on down below deck. So I'm in the 747. So we're in the top deck where we fly. But below deck, our flight attendants are kind of reporting back to us that it's pretty somber down there, and there's a lot of heaviness, and then a lot of call to action to figure out what's next. Meanwhile, we as the unit are already looking at where we're going to go to position the president for. We would think that he's going to go for a visit. So we have already started that planning action in place. And by the time we landed, we had a pretty solid plan for our portion of what we were going to do that would go under the entire umbrella of the White House Military Office, who is our operational control for that unit.
When you're speaking about all these events and the grave situations that you and our leaders, you're carrying our leaders, right? Biden, Pence, Trump, and depending on who was vice president or president at the time, whether you were fulfilling your role as either an Air Force One or Air Force Two pilot, respectively, depending on the time period, you talk about, yes, the catastrophic, tragic event, what happened in Las Vegas, what happened in Uvalde, Texas, coming back, from overseas, and whether it's domestic or international traveling, there is a lot of preparation for each mission. And with relationship building, it matters so much that the relationships that you build with your team, and it has to be where communication is fundamentally on point. You have to be fundamentally sound in your judgment or how you compartmentalize certain things that are going on, certain things that you're hearing, but still focusing on flying the plane, right? And the fact that you have this serious responsibility, the most important responsibility carrying our heads of state in our country. So, from a relationship building perspective, talk to my audience and me about how, from a relationship building standpoint, how it has to be the best and most crisp it can possibly be in terms of preparation, because you have to be able to trust each other and rely on each other's strengths and abilities, the skills, their day to day routines, because you have to also then get in a rhythm from the time that a mission starts until the time the mission completes. So, walk me through those instances for my audience and me at home.
I will go and hark back to my director of operations days. So almost the last job I held in the Air Force and within the Presidential Airlift Group. Relationship building is key, and how you just kind of touched on that. There's a level of trust that you have to have with the individual that's a leader, that's organizing something. I always attached it to, how do I build a level of trust? I got to make myself be a human. I'm not a robot. I'm not someone that's above someone else, even though rank is a thing in the military. Within our unit was such a family kind of environment that rank was there. Everyone knew it. There was a level of order and construct, but we treated everybody with a sense of respect and dignity, to the extent that they were a family. We talked before we went on air about our unit being still an amazing alumni association, but kind of like fraternity sorority type thing. And that holds true. It's an amazing unit. So not only the trust and everything and building yourself as a human, but I always attacked it with a level of sense of humor too. And so I'll just give you an example. We all got issued our own phones for the unit. I created a handful of text threads with different agencies within the Presidential Airlift Group. So basically each section, your flight attendant section, the comm system operator section, the people that create and generate our orders, the maintenance section. I had my own text thread built with them, and they were all centered around Saturday Night Lives. Like, the picture I put in there would be some sort of SNL thing, because I love SNL. And so I would text them, and they knew once they got used to the way that I operated, which was through texts and gifts and seeing them in the office and everything. There was a little bit of a rapport that I built, and that was intentional. That was so that they can start to trust me and see that, hey, I'm just someone that's enjoying my job, but wanting to enjoy it with them at the same time, because our job is stressful. Our mission is point blank not to fail the President of the United States for the Air Force One mission. I mean, it's a very cut and dry statement. But how do you set up for success is trusting the people that are there. And so I made that an intentional process as far as trusting, but bringing it with a sense of humor. So, for instance, the jet we fly now, the 747, has been flying in the Air Force since 1990, or carrying the President of the United States. So George H.W. Bush was the first. It is the longest serving aircraft in presidential history, dating back to 1943. So, being an amazing aircraft, there's two of them, it's not immune to maintenance things or other things that we have to take care of on a routine basis. And our maintenance team as a whole, the Presidential Logistics Squadron, they do an amazing job. I love every single one of them, of making these jets fly and look beautiful at the same time. But there is certainly instances when things happened behind the scenes leading up to missions, and the jets got to do certain things, but I had the relationship in place with the people that were in charge of making that happen, that they were not afraid to bring to me an issue, and then I was not afraid to bring that up the chain to the ultimate boss, the presidential pilot. And then from there, it was a matter of problem solving. So there's a lot of problem solving that went in behind the scenes, but that problem solving layer of actually getting down and getting to the root cause of stuff was a lot easier because of the relationships that were built in place, because of the trust, and a little bit of just sense of humor, because everyone was able to be human and vulnerable at the same time. So, in an essence, no one was afraid to make a mistake because there was no backlash for making a mistake. We all knew the goal that we were trying to attain.
I love how you bring in so much of the mathematics into it because you're a graduate of the Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. And obviously, professionals in your position, being in the US military, you have that type of training where going back to, your younger days of academics and learning what could be applied in the real world, but you're learning the academics behind it. But then you don't understand until you get into the real world that the information that you learned when you were getting your master's in at Emory Riddle, that now you get to apply the knowledge that you learned and put it in, real world application. So when you're flying these missions and when you're carrying, vice presidents, presidents, how much of that training from when you were younger, I mean, how much of it is applying? Obviously, it becomes with great instinct or things in the back of your mind. You've always known that if you're going to be put into a situation, even if it's unfamiliar, you're still able to, from your memory bank, take it from what you learned in school, but then also being able to be put in a position where you are having to adapt to situations or whatever might be thrown at you. So talk to me about that perspective.
That perspective happens in a lot of different positions in the Air Force. I will speak to it from a pilot because that's what I am. And whether I'm a pilot in the Air Force One unit, which I was honored to be, or a pilot in many different aircraft that I've flown throughout my career, that technical expertise is number one. And so I have a technical background that I did in college. Embry Riddle was a stepping stone, not only to just enhance that technical background, but in order to increase my rank within the Air Force too, which was just kind of required as far as military education. But as far as answering your question, as a pilot, you have to have a technical expertise of what you're doing, not only understanding the aircraft systems and what's going on, but then when stuff is not going so well, emergency type scenarios, you have to understand how to attack that scenario while maintaining calm. In the Air Force, our big mantra is I'm going to maintain aircraft control, analyze the situation, and take the proper action. Those three steps have been ingrained to us since pilot training. You can almost adapt that to your entire life. No matter what something's going on, you got to maintain control of what's going on. You can't lose it. So for us flying, we got to maintain the aircraft in a state or a level position, a neutral position, and maintain it with whatever's going on. Then we got to analyze what's going on. And that analyzation comes because, it's probably a lot easier in certain situations with some expertise in a particular aircraft, but because of the technical knowledge that you have and the study rhythms that you have, you can adapt to see what's going on with the aircraft in real time. And then from that, using a crew, because I've flown crew aircraft, I'm not a fighter pilot, using the crew as a whole, come up with a good battle plan using your checklists in order to make it a safe result out of that. So a lot of that is just it's discipline, it's trusting your teammates that you have in the cockpit, but you have to build up your reserves and study all the time. So me as a person and the way that my brain operates, I study pretty routinely. I still study now for the private job that I fly now, and I chair fly. And what do I mean by chair fly? So literally I'll sit in a chair or I'll stand around my kitchen floors or whatever, especially when I'm new to aircraft, and I will rehearse the scenes of a takeoff, a landing, a particular approach, or a particular profile. And I will walk through that, the muscle memories I'm going to do with my hands or with the autopilot or just in general, in the radio calls and the different steps I will do to get from one point to the other. And I've done that throughout my whole career. That is just one particular thing that has helped me. And it's one thing that in pilot training, when we're teaching new kids to fly the planes, giving them a set of tools in order for them to get the application into their brain and then to actually doing it. I've always found that to be versus just kind of reading stuff. I'm more of a hands-on visual type learner. And I did that a lot because I taught pilot training. So I would tell them a whole bunch of different techniques to get this stuff. But route studying and exposure and is really, a big part of the battle.
And throughout all of this, did you ever have that moment that said, wow, I'm flying the vice president of the United States? I'm flying the president of the United States. Did that ever come to mind where you had time to just reflect for a brief moment or an instance? Because you talk about having composure, you talk about having a sense of calm and discipline. And these are rudimentary functions that you exercise on a daily basis. So the idea that you have to have a certain temperament and you have to be able to, again, adapt and be versatile and really not exhaust yourself in terms of you can't worry about things that you can't control. However, when it comes to carrying a vice president or a president, you might have to try to thread the needle, right? In terms of that fine line between what you can or cannot control, because you are trying to really exercise the most flawless missions, and there aren't any redos, right? There aren't any practice trials, right? I mean, obviously there's a lot of practice and there's times where you probably have done enough practice that when you are actually carrying heads of state that you're ready to go, but would love to get your perspectives on that.
In terms of being a pilot, and I will speak to that, and just, all the pilots that I've ever flown with, carrying people of significance or whatever, I think we all are concerned with our own lives and our own families. How's that? And so we are very much attuned to being safe and operating and being technically proficient in the aircraft, knowing what we're going to do when something happens. So we're rehearsing different scenarios so that when something does happen, you kind of have an instinct about what you're going to do, working with the checklist and the rest of your crew. But at the end of the day, like, I love my family. And so I want to come home to them, regardless of who's in the back of the plane. And so when I was flying Air Force Two or Air Force One, yep, initially there's probably that sense of like, oh my gosh, this is, we're actually doing this. But at the end of the day, you quickly put that to ease and you go back on your training. And I want to say that I was more nervous or kind of attuned to not letting the rest of my squadron mates down and my boss in those moments than I was for who was in the back of the plane, if that makes sense. I remember my first left seat sortie with the president. My boss said, "Hey, you got the next leg." And I'm like, "Okay." Because traditionally, of the Air Force One pilots that are in the unit at the time, ranges from like 10 to 12 of us. About three, including the presidential pilot, the lead pilot, are normally the left seat people, meaning they are the ones doing the takeoffs and landings and actually operating the aircraft. Everybody else, the other pilots sitting in the right seat, they're the one operating the Air Force One call sign on the radio and doing everything else. But they are attuned to what's going on at all times because the boss, the left seat pilot, could be distracted with a number of things because there's a lot going on other than just flying the plane. And so we were trained at a moment's notice to be able to take over and fly or operate or do whatever. Or if something happened and we needed to be in the left seat, we could do that. But more often than not, we were in the right seat. But I got a couple sorties. I was very fortunate enough to get a couple legs in the left seat. And I remember my first one, the limo's coming up to the plane. You're seeing everything play, and everything that we do is very rehearsed. There's a very scripted scenario to what's going on. And that kind of levels into some of your former questions. We script everything out. So when things go differently, we know that A, something's a little bit different. And then B, we can react a lot better, but everyone's on the same script or the same standard operating or SOE at that point. And so I remember the limo coming up and my Apple Watch right here says, "Hey, your heart rate's a little racing right now." And so I was in the moment, but I relied on my training and everything else I was doing there. And I kind of just chuckled at my boss sitting in the seat next to me. But at the end of the day, I think I was more wrapped up in not letting him down for giving me the opportunity to be in this seat than I was for the person coming up the stairs, if that makes sense.
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. And that really allowed my audience and me at home to, step into your world or what was your world that you still very much keep in close proximity with. You still talk to a lot of your fellow pilots, retired or still active. And I love the fact that you're a private pilot. So you still have the opportunities to do what you love, and that's flying. Talk to me briefly about what that transition was like working in the federal government, working as an everyday US Air Force member. And then, now you're a private pilot, but it allows you to have a lot more time with family. And then I want to talk about Renala and your book, Living Room Leadership, that you and your wife co authored. So, that transition of being a private pilot, what has that been like for you?
It's been a good experience. I will say the transition from active duty to retired life or the next stage is different for everybody. I think there's the initial excitement about doing something different and getting off active duty. My cousin Mike, I think when we initially get off, we're just like, you feel so ingrained into the unit, and a unit that I had been with for such a long time and probably could still be with if I chose to stay on active duty versus Brittany and I, both as a joint decision to get out of the Air Force, move on, and really further develop Renala here in Central Florida and beyond. For me, it still is a little bit of a challenge. There's so much purpose that was ingrained within being in the military for 20 plus years, and then in particular, the last job that I did, that when you go in and do something different, I'm lucky to be a part of an organization now that I am with a lot of former military pilots in general. And so we kind of try to keep that purpose and that camaraderie and that level of thinking because we all understand each other. So I'm very blessed in that regards, but it's a different transition that it's hard to describe. It's just different. But I am very fortunate, like you said, to be able to still have a tie-in to the alumni part of the organization. We hold an every 3-week call with all the former pilots that at least I served with. And then we have reach backs to the units. When guys retire, we're going to the unit to see it. I'm very blessed to be a part of that organization that I will carry for the rest of my life. And that's not only just me, that's for Brittany too. Both of us are involved in that uniqueness of that. But yeah, military transition is tough. And I know that for me, when I say it's tough, I know it's 10 times tougher for someone else. And I'm very respectful of that. And so it's a unique time and everyone handles it a little bit differently. But that's why you got your family. And I think that's what we're going to talk about next.
Yes, absolutely. And, I always say that relationship building, and I tell this to all my guests, that relationship building is the essence of humanity. And really, it's looking after your fellow neighbor, looking after your family members, your colleagues, and being there for each other. And, again, the core principle of how we should live our lives as human beings is building relationships. Throughout history, we always hear about nation building and being able to have these diplomatic ties to one another, or being able to coexist as people, where if you think about it in the political world or the sports world or the military world, that it's our relationships that get us through each day, and to be able to accomplish what we need to be able to accomplish individually. But individual performance is all well and good. It matters. Your body of work matters, but your individual work would suffer if it wasn't for the collective unit that you are a part of, where everybody's individual output is what allows all the people in a group to feel that what they're putting out is because everybody's locked in and what they're putting into the relationships. So the relationships that you have amongst your fellow pilots in the military sense, those principles or the way that you approach those relationships should be the same way that you approach your family relationships. So, in creating Renala and writing the book Living Room Leadership, talk to me about the inspiration behind that, what made you want to write the book, but to what you and Brittany were speaking with me about last week when we had coffee here in Central Florida. What excites you the most about this new chapter? Although you talk about the challenging nature of transitioning, well, what excites you about this new chapter and growing this business and making sure that you're talking to the right people and promoting the business, the work that you cite in the book as a way for people to get back and looking in the family construct, and how could we have the family unit operating as one? Members are in touch with each other's feelings and routines and how they perceive and look at the world. And, Brittany had talked about there's a lot of sensory play and there are a lot of activities that allow family members to engage in, where you feel like you're accomplishing tasks as a team. Very fascinating, a lot of psychology behind it, a lot of those principles where you're operating as one. So, would love to know more.
Absolutely. So, Living Room Leadership, or the company Renala, was birthed about 4 years ago, and it comes out of our story. And like any great company, and we're hoping that our company grows. And it's already great. It's built out of a story and it's built out of our own story. So, nearing our 11th anniversary in 2019, Brittany asked for a divorce. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. And we were back in DC. I was 6 months into being into the Air Force One unit of the Presidential Airlift Group. At that time, knowing that I could finish out my career there, we wouldn't have to move again. I definitely lived a lot of my Air Force career trying to position ourselves back on the East Coast so that Brittany can get back to that environment where we met in my first assignment and kind of have her be able to have her career take off. And I felt that I had always been the guy that had squashed her career and dreams because of the sacrifice that she's had to do the whole time in moving from different assignment to different assignment. And so I carried a lot of weight with that. And so I was kind of in the mindset of like, if this, then that would happen. So I've always thought like, if I go back to DC, then things will be good. And then 2019 happened and I was like, whoa, what happened? We were basically just going parallel like this in a relationship. Obviously, in a relationship that really thrives, you want to be interdependent, not codependent, and not on a parallel track. So managing the stresses of being in the National Capital Region with both jobs that she had and I had, young kids, I bet you a lot of your listeners and everybody out there can feel the same way. You just feel like you're going in parallel tracks. It's not like you intended to be that way. It's just the way things are happening. So
You felt that you were living but not coexisting.
correct. Yeah. So we were just not operating optimally at the family level, and then us as a married couple. And so we did a lot of deep individual work, both of us. One of the amazing things that made me fall more in love with the unit that I was with was I'm a type of guy that just can't keep it all bottled in. So one day I just made the courageous move that I'm going to go tell my fellow coworkers what's going on, even if it meant that I couldn't do this job anymore. That day was very uplifting and very amazing because I was met with the fear of knowing that this could all be nothing because, I'm in a unit where they don't want to really care about your private stuff. That was complete opposite. And that's why I say the Air Force One unit is a family because they cared about you on an individual level because they wanted the people that they hired, they wanted them. And so when I came in and said, I'm not okay, that was actually okay. So they embraced me. They said, "What do you need? We want you here. We want to support you." And, I was still back to what you said previously. I was still giving myself in the technical expertise in my job there. But then I was afforded the opportunity to go and look into myself and figure out the things that I needed to do individually and then with Brittany for us to reconcile. And throughout the rest of that year, there was an amazing light at the end of the tunnel. And through some grace and God and a whole bunch of things, we came back together, but it was still a process. And then obviously COVID hit, meant more for us, where everybody's now just kind of hunkered down together. But that was an opportunity for us to even get closer. So it was out of that. Brittany herself, and I think she described this, I would imagine, on your podcast previously, where she got involved in coaching. And it was out of coaching that she saw like this is not only amazing for me, but I would love through my facilitating background that she has and a very strategic mindset and brain in order to help women in her same situation try to navigate careers and family and all that type stuff. She quickly found out, and through talking with me also, she's like, you know what? If I'm helping someone in the family get stronger, well, what happens to the others in the family? There actually becomes a bigger divide. And so that's when really quickly the family part of aspect of Renala came to be is we can't just help one person. You can help one person, but we want to help everyone in the family. And then through that, we said, you know what? We believe the family is the blueprint foundation for going out into the world and making changes. So our tagline is leadership begins at home. And Living Room Leadership is a book that describes the blueprint for creating that vision, values, purpose within a family. And then through that construct, we're like, well, what would be different in how to do this? And so Brittany thought about that and developed different methodologies of play. And so how we get to this construct of building a mission vision statement for your family, which is something that I was always accustomed to in the military, was having a particular mission or vision statement. Well, how do we do that for your family? Well, we use different modalities of play, Lego series play being one of them, in order to build the metaphor that's all stuck in our brain and in our nervous systems out in the open so that we can see what is really on the inside and what we really value as an individual and how that aligns with the rest of the family. And so that is what we describe in living room leadership because we believe it all begins at home. And as an example to that, once we kind of did this construct and everything, this is around the time where I'm kind of finishing up my career in the presidential airlift group and I'm holding the job that I talked about previously. It made me better at that job because I understood that my family is thriving at home. And does that mean that we're thriving all the time? It means I'm thriving at home, even during the hills and valleys of whatever. But we have a solid foundation to know that when things are not meeting our intent and our mission and our vision, then we need to adjust. We need to adjust those things. But when the family is operating at home and has a sense of values and vision and purpose, then you can use that sense to go out into the work environment or to your relationship environment or whatever environment, just walking down the street and display and a lot more leadership and be a lot more happy and joyful in life, knowing that the core foundation of what you really believe in is going well.
Yes, and did you feel that when you were in the military, when you think about living room leadership and you think about what inspired you and Brittany to write this book, and I appreciate you being so candid and Brittany shared that with me as well, that you and her almost got a divorce, and that I'm sure was a very traumatic experience or feeling that, oh my goodness, Brittany and I have to get back to a place where we're being interdependent on each other, not codependent, and not in a situation where we're not in touch with each other's needs or wants or how to raise our family. And that's a very trying time for any family. And sadly, a lot of families are not able to make it out to the other side where they're able to reconcile. And thank goodness for you and Brittany that you both were able to put your differences aside and be back to one unit, which is wonderful, wonderful news, not only for you both but for your family. With respect to living room leadership, do you feel also that it's not stressed enough or talked about enough, even in the military or even professional life? I love the fact that you were able to go to your colleagues in the workplace and tell them that I'm not okay, but it's okay that you're able to go to them and that they're open. They want to see that you're in a good place. They want to be able to provide words of wisdom or just, comfort. And so, do you feel that living room leadership should be stressed more and taught more in the military so military members are able to know that, wow, you can look at living room leadership as a text or a guide to how to balance family life with life in the military, whether you're stationed domestically or stationed anywhere in the country. But for those who have to go overseas and who are gone for periods of time, no matter the distance, what allows family members to stay grounded and to deal with maybe those long stretches of deployment overseas or somewhere else across the country, that living room leadership has a place in these military members' lives. And because as a former Air Force One, Air Force Two pilot, someone who has lived that life, knows that life very well, that the challenges that you and Brittany faced, now you can take your company and take this book and to be able to then teach it in the military, because there's a place for this to make military members time serving a lot easier. So I would love your thoughts on that.
Yes, absolutely. So for the book itself, in terms of the military environment, so the time frame that I served in a post 9/11 era, certainly I've had my deployments, and I know that many friends and colleagues that I have served with and people that I know have had even longer deployments that I have and have been in more interesting situations or whatever. But certainly, I flew the C-5 for a number of years and was just gone constantly, going downrange, as we say, to Iraq and Afghanistan. But the military life is tough on families. And there's a lot of careers out there outside the military where it is tough on families too. But just in terms of the military, which I come from, the divorce rate is really high. I know that we looked into the statistics of all that, and it's like between 40 and 50%. The divorce rate is high amongst the military, and it's just a constantly a gone type scenario, especially in the environments that we lived where you came off of two wars. And so there's a lot of sensitivity with that. I think the core principles of living room leadership are wanted in the military. And I think over the course of my 20 plus year career, I've seen a change. And I think it's because of the service members and the generations that come into the military where they actually care. I don't want to say that the previous did not care about their families, but there was so much more connectiveness needed. And maybe it was because of the information, where everything's at your fingertips and people are yearning for more connection, that kind of hit and people are wanting more family and more connection than before, whereas it felt like there was a separation between work and family. And what we're trying to build within our company is that there's not a separation between work and family. They're kind of like they're together. As a pilot, what I didn't touch on earlier is how do you handle one thing, but you got other things on your mind and all this other stuff? Is because us as pilots, that I could speak to, we compartmentalize things. So I'm able to say, if something's going on, I'm going to handle the task at hand and not worry about this thing over here. But in terms of what we're trying to do with living room leadership in Renala is that your whole life is not compartmentalized. It's a loop that's woven together. It's kind of like I'll throw a Marvel thing out there because my daughter hopefully will listen to this. But like Loki's holding the timeline together and he's weaving all the different timelines, and it's like everything is connected and woven together. And that is how living room leadership in Renala is that we believe that the family environment at home and however you go and do your life, it's all connected. And I think the military recognizes that and is yearning for that. And I believe that we could help bridge that gap too within there. There's a lot of great programs that are out there, but making the actual connection between those two, I believe, something that we can add value to.
Tell me about your kids and how they've adopted living room leadership principles and how you and Brittany have instilled these values into raising your children and how they also, as younger people, are able to promote or advocate for living room leadership because they are part of a younger generation who should be exposed to living room leadership and how, as their classmates or their friends who are growing up and one day will raise their families. I mean, living room leadership, it applies to every generation and it applies to every walk of life and not just the military, but I'm sure you could think of other professions where living room leadership needs to be a constant in people's lives.
Yeah, I think our kids, for us, Brittany and I are certainly human and not immune to mistakes. Probably me more, but I will own my mistakes within the family if I do something or whatever. And I think the way that I treat each one of them and the way I treat Brittany, I know kids are very smart. They pick up on this stuff. And so if you can emulate the way that you're going to act out in society and try to even act even better at home, your kids are going to pick up on that. And so they know that if this is the way my dad acts here and I see how he acts in the environment, there it's like this the same person. So there's no differences in Jeff going in or out. For the kids, it's opening the lines of communication. So I think about talking about values, vision, and purpose within the family and not just kind of circumventing it or just kind of saying, well, yeah, we believe in stuff, but we've never really defined it and put it on paper and actually figured out what the individual strengths of our kids are and of ourselves are. And then they can see that, hey, dad's really talented in this area and I'm a little bit different. And that's okay because combine all those different talents, and you got a superpower. And that's what we really want to stress is that everyone within the family thinks differently, operates differently, values things differently. And that's not of a source of like, we all have to be the same in order to operate together. It's like we need to celebrate those differences in the way that we think and act and do things differently and use that as a superpower, not as a negative thing in order to move forward within the family and go. So I think when we walk around Disney and my daughter that's 15 still wants to hold my hand walking around the park, I feel that that is a success that things are working.
Well, it just shows that your family unit is as close as it can be, where you want to make sure that your kids are experiencing life the way that you and Brittany experienced growing up, where there is still this innocence or there's this simplicity to life in this complex world that we live in. And when you take time to think about, yes, what we do on our daily basis is trying to grow the company and promote living room leadership and making sure that families are in tune with each other and their needs and how they can experience life in a way that is relatable or that is feeling that people within the family can talk to one another and share ideas or insights, or if you see something on the news, let's say, or you hear a story that you could talk about, hey, this is what's going on in our world and this is how I'm feeling and these are my thoughts, and to openly share those thoughts. For example, and I know that we talked offline that respectfully you try to take a neutral position that you've held, but for example, what's going on in the war now between Israel and Iran and US taking part in it, just from the perspective of having to teach your children, hey, there are things happening in the world that we can't control, but we can have an intellectual conversation about what's happening or what the ramifications might be. And whatever you're feeling or whatever emotions is popping in your mind, of the way you're reacting to what you're hearing or what people are sharing with you about their insights, but just putting into perspective that we can only control what we can control on a daily basis. And yes, we can take time to know the world around us and be informed, because it's very important that we have an informed citizenry and not be aware of what's happening around us, but not losing sight of just what we can do today to accomplish as a family so we can then look forward to the work that we did today that applies for tomorrow to make tomorrow a better day. So, in light of what I've said with respect to just having those open conversations with your children and them seeing what's happening in the world around them, how do you advise them or tell them how they should look at things?
I think to the end part of your statement there, I think if you want to change the world, Mother Teresa said it best, and we use that as a line of inspiration within Renala is go home and love on your family. And so, yeah, there's a lot going on in the world, and our kids are exposed to all kinds of stuff. And we talk about it within our little entrepreneurial groups and everything for just even on their phones and their iPads and the sources of news. And there's a lot of fear. And I think each generation, when we grew up, we said, man, I feel that there's a lot going on in the world. And now I think there's a lot going on in the world. And so, keeping those lines of communication open with your kids within the family and not just attaching everything to an emotion, but then talking about the emotion and then how that makes you feel, and then searching for the actual facts and what's going on can be very tricky in today's society. And so I don't have the right quote unquote answer for that, but I think keeping the lines of communication open and being present in your kids' lives and trying to limit the distractions of yourself when it is those times that you're trying to be intentional and listening. I think listening is a big thing. And certainly me, I can be a better listener myself. And that's just limiting the distractions and not allowing my brain to go on to what's going on and different thoughts and everything else, but to just be in the moment and understand the perspective of what's going on that your kids are learning. And I think we're all thirsting for what you said in the beginning of your statement for reigniting our childlike wonder. We all want to get back to the joys and wonders of being a kid. And I know that is something that's within our construct too, as our company, as we're partnered with our friends over at Astoria with Harris and Kate. It's about igniting that childlike wonder and being curious. And I think that's a big thing right there. It's being curious is probably one of the best leadership traits that we can bestow upon our kids is being curious. And I guess seeing is believing and all those different things, but it's, being curious to go out and find out what's real and what you value. And then that forms the things going forward.
Absolutely. And last couple of questions before we depart from our interview. I really want to thank you again for your time, Jeffrey Anderson, former Air Force One, Air Force Two pilot, COO, and co-founder of Renala with your wife, Brittany Anderson. And Brittany was telling me many years ago when she worked for the National Journal Atlantic Media, she worked with Chuck Todd, who was my 56th guest on my podcast. And I'll have to be sure to share with Chuck how my interviews went with you and Brittany, respectively. And, when I think of the stories you've told me, just reiterating, I know that you talked about some of those heavier situations with Uvalde in Las Vegas, and those were really tough and very emotional circumstances. But from a positive perspective, what was your favorite domestic mission and what was your favorite international mission as a pilot?
I think my most memorable domestic mission was probably the 20-year anniversary of 9/11 that I described earlier.
Mhm.
Just because of the significance of that day, being able to be a part of that, and then what I had described earlier. I mean, I will always remember that. And the guys that I flew with, we talk about that pretty routinely. International trip, I was on President Biden's first trip overseas. During his administration, we went to Italy and then went over to Scotland. We're in COVID still, but kind of coming out of it. And so our unit as a whole, we went into work a little bit. Usually when we went into work, it was the COVID test. We tested almost every other day. And because of just the job that we had and the proximity we had to the people we served. So this trip was kind of like getting everyone out and together. And so you got 60 of us in these countries, and we all just wanted to hang out with each other. And so the special bond that we had of a unit roaming the streets of Italy and Rome, which I had never been to, which was memorable. And then I'm a big golfer. So from sports, we went to Scotland and we stayed at the St. Andrews Hotel. And then we didn't play golf or anything because of the timing. But we, as the pilots and the navs and everybody and a few others, we walked the course at St. Andrews and just had some great conversations. And we got a picture of all of us on the bridge there on the 18th. Those are the trips I remember. It's the camaraderie and the trips that and the connecting and the people that I'll remember the most. And that is kind of the highlight of your podcast here. It's building relationships and connectedness. And so those are the ones that I remember the most. And I just want to say one last thing is my journey in my military life is unique. And I didn't know that that would happen, but I could not have done any of this without my wife, Brittany. She's been the rock this whole time. And I think it's because of our experiences together and the stories that we've lived that we are hoping that will be a foundation for not only our family, but for serving others beyond within the company Renala. But there's certainly no part of my journey that would not have been possible without her and my kids for that matter.
And those are wonderful final words of wisdom on the importance of relationship building in a team environment. Any additional comments before we depart from our interview?
No, I appreciate the time. I enjoyed our coffee last week. And this is such a cool podcast because it's right up my alley with all the relationship stuff. So this is amazing. I wish you the best of luck. I'm honored to be on it. And I hope that we can continue to work together.
Absolutely, Geoffrey. Well, thank you so much again for being my 109th guest on the Wave Capital's guest speaker series on relationship building and the team environment. It was an honor and a privilege to interview you as well as your wife, Brittany. And I look forward to staying in touch and hearing about all the extraordinary accomplishments and milestones that Renala will get to experience with your leadership, with Brittany's leadership. And, we're locals, we're practically neighbors, live down the street from each other. So if I could ever be of any assistance anyway, please let me know. But thank you again for your time today.
Thank you so much, Garrett. Thank you.
You take care.
You too.